Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Marianne Monteleone, Vice President of Professional Development for the Long Island Board of Realtors. Welcome to our Wednesday webinar. Today's session is a part two to a very interesting session we had early in the late month of April, which was National Fair Housing Month, Fair Housing Source of Income Top Tips with Neil Garfinkel. Because of, like I said, the interest, we kind of ran out of time, and Neil has graciously agreed to carry over and have a part two for us. So let me formally introduce him, and then we'll turn it over to Neil Garfinkel. Neil is the managing partner of Abrams, Garfinkel, Margolis, Bergson, LLP, a 28-year-old law firm with offices in New York, California, and Long Island. He is a real estate and banking attorney and specializes in representing the real estate brokerage industry. He is broker counsel to the Real Estate Board of New York, but for the first 12 years of his career worked very closely with LIBOR. He teaches fair housing and legal updates for LIBOR every month. So let me welcome and turn it over to Neil. Thanks for being with us, Neil.
Of course, Marianne. Thanks for having me again. Always appreciate the opportunity to be here. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Okay.
Yes.
And so I'm actually coming to you from California today. Hopefully this will all the technology will work really well. So yes, last month we did a tips and topics on, and really focused on source of income. And we kind of rushed through the materials. So Marianne asked me to come back and kind of do a second parter. So just curious, how many people were here for last month's presentation? Okay, so some of you don't have your cameras on. Last time we did it in a webinar format. So I really was just talking to you, but you couldn't, I couldn't see you. I really felt strongly about doing this one in a face-to-face. So to the extent that you're comfortable, I'd ask that you turn on your cameras, particularly because I'd really like to answer your questions or have you an opportunity to have more of a dialogue. That's how I like to teach. So for those of you who have taken my classes, you know that. So you can feel free to stop me at any time. We have a lot of stuff that we're going to try to cover in this hour. But let me first just give you a quick introduction, tell you a little bit about myself. To those of you who were here last time, I apologize if there's a little bit duplicative, but I do want to kind of give everyone an opportunity to just know a little bit about me. So as Marianne said, I'm an attorney. I always say, don't hold it against me. I'm actually one of the good guys. I don't sue anyone. I am a transactional attorney. And in particular, I really focus on two things. Number one, as Marianne indicated, I focus on representing the real estate brokerage industry. When I started my firm, I started a big firm, and then I left and I started a licensing company, and then I went back and I worked for a smaller firm on Long Island, and then ultimately started my firm 28 years ago. And I had no clients when I first started. I had no clients. And I said, how am I going to do business? And it had occurred to me that, you know what, if I do work with real estate agents such as yourselves, it would be a great way to build a career. And I couldn't have been more right. So great decision. And LIBOR, and in particular, Marianne, and I know that she doesn't want me to date her, but again, literally 28 years ago, I came to Marianne and said, you know, would you help me teach? And she helped me get my state license, and I started teaching for LIBOR. And as she said, for the first 12 years of my career, I worked very closely with LIBOR. I was the chair of your legal assistance committee, your common interest ownership committee, and it's been a great relationship. So I always like to thank you for helping me forge an identity, really create an identity for myself professionally and even personally. So thank you for doing that. My firm is Abrams, Garfinkel, Margolis, Bergson. I am counsel to Rebney. What happened was 16 years ago, so the first 12 years I worked with LIBOR, 16 years ago, Rebney reached out. Rebney is similar to LIBOR, and reached out and they needed counsel. And so for Rebney, I host a legal hotline every day. I answer about 6 to 10 phone calls and emails from REBNY members. I do a column on Thursdays for all the REBNY membership called the Legal Line Question of the Week. And then on Fridays, I do something called Fair Housing Fridays. I do another column focused on fair housing. And it's really become a specialty, so to speak, of mine. So if everyone could put themselves on mute, I'd appreciate it. And so fair housing has really become a passion, somewhat of an expertise for me, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today because it is such an important topic. So I think I covered everything. One also mentioned I'm also the founder of something called the Real Estate Center for Success and the Toolbox for Real Estate Agent Success. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Finally, I sit on the New York State Real Estate Board. I was appointed by the governor, and I work very closely. I'm a member of NAR, NYSOR, LIBOR, and so on. So that's a little bit about me. Let's talk about why is fair housing so important. And I talked about this last time, but let me tell you that I believe that there is never a lack of opportunity. We should always talk about this. Why is it so important? And I think that we could come up with, and if I was to throw out to you, why is it so important? Most of us would say, hey, it's important that everyone has the right to live wherever they want to and so on. And I agree with that. But I want us to take one step back because I think that I want to remind us collectively, and I refer to myself in this, that because I'm a transactional attorney, I represent lots of purchasers and sellers. We represent lots of banks. I want you to all take a step back and remember that what we do every day is an amazing thing. We collectively do an amazing thing every day. What do? We help people find a place to live, a place to work, and so on. And what is that? If we take a look and we talk about what are the most basic of human needs? What are the most basic of human needs? Air, clothing, food, and what else? What is the one of those most basic of human needs? Someone jump in, tell me, what is the most basic of human needs? Shelter, right? Shelter is one of the most basic of human needs. So don't ever forget that what we do every day is help people find their most basic of human needs, shelter. Would everyone agree with me? Someone give me a thumbs up. Everyone give me a thumbs up. Okay, so if we take that to the next step, the next step, which is, would everyone agree with me if that's what we do every day, and it's so important, should anyone ever be denied that shelter by virtue of what they look like or what their religious beliefs are or so on? What do you think? The answer is, of course not. That's why we do an amazing thing every day, but that's why fair housing is also so important. The need for shelter and the need for everyone to have that shelter, regardless of what are called protected characteristics or so on. Okay, so any questions or thoughts about that? Anyone want to share anything with me before I move on? Okay, so let's move on then. Let's talk about what are the two core concepts? So we're going to talk about tips today. I'm going to be giving you tips, right? And we talked about this last time, but just want to remind you that to me, there are two core concepts. There are two tips or two things that if you apply, you should be following fair housing law. So what do I mean by that? Number one, treat everyone equally, right? Treat everyone the same way. And if you do that, right, let's start with that concept. If you treat everyone the same way, in theory, should you be complying with fair housing laws? And the answer is, of course, right? If we treat everyone the same way. However, what we do as real estate agents, right? One of the things that we are required to do is vet a prospective purchaser or renter, for example, and to determine whether they financially qualify, right? While everyone should have that equal opportunity to that house, that property, right? But does that mean that everyone has the financial wherewithal to accomplish that? And the answer is no. So while we treat everyone the same way, the truth of the matter is that we still need to evaluate someone's financial criteria, their ability to afford the transaction. And so so to me, the two important things are treat everyone the same way, but you need to follow the financial criteria, follow the money is what I call it. So we're going to look at someone's financial criteria. If you do these two things, then I believe that you will be in compliance with our fair housing laws. Now, one of the important things, though, with respect to financial criteria is you need to do everything the same way as you vet someone. So we'll continue on, and you'll see how this becomes very important as you build your practices. And with that in mind, and some of you, I recognize some of your faces, you probably have heard me talk about this before. I am a huge believer in that you all need to have a very systematic approach to the way you conduct your business. So it is really important, not only from fair housing, but just in general, that you build a system in order to build your business, to conduct your business, to be successful in your business. And what do I mean by this? Well, yes, the types of properties we sell and so on vary, and every property has its own characteristics, its own personality. The people have their own characteristics, but the truth of the matter is that the way that we conduct our business is primarily the same for each transaction. So because the real estate business lends itself to doing the same things over and over again, I strongly recommend that you have checklists. So there are two types of checklists that I recommend. One are the non-negotiable things that you do on every transaction. What do you need to do on every transaction? The second type of checklist is the checklist that you use that is deal specific, meaning that, let's say you get a co-op rental. So then what do you do on that co-op rental? And what you do then, and so going back to the first type, the non-negotiable things, someone tell me, what do you do on every transaction? What should you have on your checklist, your items of things that you need to do on every transaction? Anyone want to jump in and make a suggestion? Well, how about agency disclosure?
Yeah, for substantial meeting of a person, you should always be filling out the disclosure.
Right, so exactly. So before, when we have substantive engagement with someone, or before we enter into an exclusive listing agreement, we need to give an agency disclosure form. Agency is the core of what we do our business on. So yes, we're going to have an agency. Did we discuss agency? Did we give the agency disclosure form? How about the fair housing disclosure form, right? We're going to want to give that fair housing disclosure form. So that's going to be on our list. How about getting paid? How are we getting paid? There is no such thing as an entitlement to a commission. You need to have an agreement on how to get paid. Well, when we're part of One Key, when we're part of LIBOR, we have an agreement on how we're going to share compensation. But importantly, let's say that you go outside of the One Key environment. What happens then? You go to a REBNY member, you take someone to the city. Or is there a guarantee that you're going to get paid? And the short answer is no. So you want to make sure that you know on every transaction, how are you getting paid? Just as an aside, a number of years ago, I worked with LIBOR's counsel, and we created cooperation agreements that REBNY and LIBOR members can use to make sure that we have that agreement of compensation. So those are the kinds of items that I would have on my checklist that I do on every transaction. Okay. Now we support those checklists with what I call forms and templates. The form would be the agency disclosure form, or the fair housing disclosure form, or the financial questionnaire. A template is a communication tool. It could be an email. It could be a letter. It could be a script that you use when someone calls you. And the idea is that why every time you send out the agency disclosure form, would you want to start typing an email discussing the agency disclosure form? You should build a template that you use over and over again. It will save you time. It will make you efficient, and it will make sure that you cover the things that you want to cover. So I'm a huge believer, build those checklists, support them with forms and templates. If you do that, and going back to our fair housing concept of doing everything, treating everyone the same way, if you have a checklist and you follow that checklist, is there a pretty good chance that you're going to treat everyone the same way? The answer is, of course. So those are one of my most important tips would be this concept of build the systematic approach. Okay, so I'm just curious, we're going to do a quick pop quiz. You don't need to answer this, but think about this for a second. Can you ask someone what their occupation and title are? So just show of hands, what do you think? Can you ask someone what their occupation and title are? Who says yes? Who says no? Okay, so we've got we've got some that say yes, some that say no. The answer is it depends. It depends. Are you in New York City? Because the truth of the matter is that in most places, occupation is not a protected class. But in New York City says, you know what? You shouldn't be asking what someone's occupation is. You shouldn't be asking what their title is, what their position is. Why? Because the truth of the matter is, why does it matter? What really matters is, can this person afford the property? That's what's most important. But if you look at this chart, and I'm going to explain it to you in a second, you'll notice in the middle, number 8 is lawful occupation. New York City is the only one that has that as a protected class. And so the point is that you always need to know, this is our next tip, you always need to know what the fair housing laws are in the place that you're conducting our business. And the way that our fair housing laws work is that the federal government, our state and local governments create what's called protected classes. And on this chart, we have 18 protected classes. And it ranges from age to religion to sex and so on. At the federal level, federal law protects race and color, and that started in 1866. Federal law added familial status, the protection of children, for example, or disability. Now, the way that our laws work is that we all live in the United States. We're all here, so we need to follow federal law. Federal law says, you know what, though? It's okay if the state adds to that. It can't detract from federal law, but it can add protected classes. And in fact, New York State does that. And then we see New York City does that, Nassau County and Suffolk County, and so on. The point is that you really need to know where you're conducting your business when you are, in order to understand what those fair housing laws are. Okay, so that's our next tip. Know the protected classes in the place where your property is located. Just a reminder, and part of our checklist of things that we're going to make sure that we do is we are going to make sure that we give out that fair housing disclosure form, right? It's required by law. Now, I teach a class called Using the Agency Disclosure Form as Your Best Form of Marketing. And my theory is that the agency disclosure form, well, maybe it's not the best drafted form. And I could say that because I was the guy who drafted, one of the people who drafted the form. It's still, I believe that while it protects the consumer, it also protects you. It gives you an opportunity to talk about who you are, what you do, how you're going to do it. I strongly recommend that you use that opportunity even when it comes to fair housing. Give the fair housing disclosure form, explain it, talk about it, because that is a baseline for you. We're going to talk, when we get on a little bit more, we're going to talk about some other tips. And one of those tips is going to be, hey, if someone asks you who lives in a building, for example, you're going to say, look, I can't answer that question. It would violate fair housing laws. And the way that you're going to respond to that question is you can say, remember when we met? Remember when I gave you that fair housing disclosure form? It's a baseline. It gives you the opportunity to reinforce the importance of fair housing, but also to go back to it in the event that you are asked a question that you shouldn't answer. So make sure you're giving the form, make sure you're talking about it, explaining it, and make sure you're using it as that baseline when it's appropriate. Okay, let's talk more about source of income, because I think that this is super, super important for a lot of reasons. So true or false, if a landlord is charging a monthly rental of $2,000 and a tenant has a subsidy of $1,000, the landlord needs to reduce their monthly rental to $1,000. So who says that's true? Who says it's false? Let me see a show of hands, right? Okay, so everyone recognizes, right? So there is sometimes a confusion over what lawful source of income as a protected category means. It doesn't mean that a landlord needs to reduce their monthly rental to meet the subsidy amount that the prospective tenant has. What our source of income laws say is that simply says that a landlord or an owner, seller, whatever the case, housing provider, you need to consider all lawful sources of income when qualifying someone. And I want you to write that down. So this is our next tip, right? You need to consider all lawful sources of income when qualifying someone. And what does that mean? Well, the first and foremost, and where a lot of the confusion is the concept that only salary is a source of income. That is not the case, right? Now, it may be a primary source of income for many of us, our salary, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have other sources of income. Or alternatively, it doesn't mean, or it means, for example, that someone, a renter has a subsidy, a voucher. The concept is that they are receiving assistance in paying their monthly rental. That is just as important when evaluating someone as their salary might be. And a rental, someone who is receiving a rental subsidy may not have a salary. But the truth of the matter is that there are still other sources of income. So it could be child support, it could be alimony, it could be Social Security or Social Security benefits, it could be other forms of public assistance, not only housing assistance. So there are lots of things that make up this concept of lawful source of income. And your job as an agent is that you need to recognize or understand the idea that you are going to want to consider, or you're required to consider, all of those lawful source of income when you're vetting someone. So remember, we said treat everyone the same way and follow the money. Make sure that you're focusing on the financial criteria. Well, that's exactly what this is saying. We want to make sure that when we focus on the financial criteria, we are looking at all of those sources of income. So that's what lawful source of income says. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, terrific. Wait, so someone just put something in the chat. Give me a second to just take a look. So someone asked, so I don't give out copies of my slides. And the reason why I don't do that is they're always changing. And they're really just a guideline for me. However, at the end of this class, I'm going to put in my information into the chat box, and you can feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have a specific slide you want. I also encourage you to take pictures if you'd like, so you can certainly do that as well. Okay. So I want to talk, obviously, source of income is important, right? And knowing how to qualify someone, very important. I also want to highlight, though, that it is complex and it is confusing. And therefore, it's important that at the very least today, we take away a certain basic knowledge of what this means. I also wanted to let you know that there have been a number of fair housing cases recently, and source of income has been the focus of them. And in particular, there is a fair housing agency called the Housing Rights Initiative. And the Housing Rights Initiative has brought 4 source of income cases. The first one was filed in May of 2021. It involved 88 landlords, real estate brokers, and property managers. And all of those, the defendants, all were specifically found or it's alleged that they violated fair housing laws. They refused to accept applications, accept housing vouchers, and so on. It was all source of income related. And the way that the HRI, the Housing Rights Initiative, works is they test you. They will make a phone call and they will say, hey, do you accept Section 8, for example? Or I'm interested in a co-op. Will a co-op accept Section 8? And based on that test, they found that, again, 88 landlords, real estate brokers, and property managers did not follow the law. They brought another case right after that in May of 2022. This was in Manhattan, and this accused another 28 real estate brokers, landlords, and property managers, again, of violating fair housing laws, particularly as it relates to source of income. And in this case, what they looked at was the concept of asking a prospective tenant, hey, do you make 40 times the rent? Or do you have a 700 credit score? And what the owners or the defendants were found was that they were using those types of criteria as a means of a proxy to not to rent to someone who had a voucher. The third case came in May 25th, 2022, and this case focused on co-ops and condos. Just a reminder to everyone that co-ops and condos have to follow all fair housing laws. Even though a co-op has the right to reject someone, co-ops still have to follow all fair housing laws. So this case focused on, HRI focused on the idea that they would approach someone, a broker who said, oh, vouchers don't work in co-ops, or the board is not going to approve it, or it's a private building, so they're not going to allow it, and so on. Or, you know what, there's too many hoops to jump through, so we're not going to take you there. The fourth case just occurred about a month ago. This case focused specifically on Section 8, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and it focused on Long Island real estate brokers and owners. And in this case, again, found the concept, landlord does not take Section 8. Landlord said no to that before. So I bring this up, right, because I think it's really important that we have at the minimum, a good understanding of what the voucher programs are. So now I want to go through, I want to take the next 15 minutes or so just to talk a little bit about what the common voucher programs are that are in New York. You will notice many of them are New York City related. Housing choice vouchers, or Section 8, which is known at, which most of us know, actually is throughout the state. And then there are more local programs. So we're going to cover just kind of the most common ones. That does not mean that there are not other programs out there. So the Housing Choice Vouchers, the HCV program, aka Section 8, this is an interesting program because it is administered by many different agencies. It could be the New York City Department of Housing. It could be New York State Homes and Community Renewal. It could be NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, HPD, and so on. So it varies. HUD-VASH is another form of Section 8, but that is focused specifically on veterans. The Emergency Housing Voucher Program, also another program similar to Section 8. HASA, or HRA, it's administered by the Human Rights Administration. It focuses on those people who have AIDS or HIV. City FEPS is a New York City program. It's short for New York City Family Homelessness and Eviction Prevention Support. And then there's another program called SOTA, Special One-Time Assistance. So as I indicated, HCV, Housing Choice Voucher, is the most common of programs. It is administered by local agencies. So you should be aware that you might be getting, I'll show you what some of them look like. Basically, this program allows a family to select the housing of their choice, meaning that there's no limitation on what type of housing there is. In theory, every property is available for Section 8, for example. The recipients, what they do is they apply, and they're granted this voucher based on their economic situation, their income, and generally the voucher will cover roughly 60 to 70% of the rent. So payment standards are really just the monthly amount that the recipient will receive towards the rent. So that's what a payment standard is. And it is determined, and it will vary. The way that the payment standard will be created varies. It could be based on the number of people in a family. It could be a fixed amount. So it will vary. Now, importantly, there is not an expectation for you, the real estate agent, to be an expert in every one of these programs. However, there is an expectation that you will become familiar with these programs, and you will never turn away someone because you don't know how to work with these programs. This is an example of an HCV Section 8 voucher. Now, I'm not sure if you can see it, it's kind of small, but you'll see in the middle, I'm kind of circling it. This is a NYCHA, a New York City Housing Authority voucher. So the way that we know the type of voucher is by this number 7, it indicates the public housing agency that is issuing the voucher. Here is another form, but you'll see this one is New York HPD. So when you receive a voucher, you will look to see which agency is overseeing it. Now, these are what's called the payment standards. You'll notice that they became effective on January 1st. And what I want to point out to you is, number one, it varies depending on whether there are utilities involved and so on. These are set amounts, but I want to call your attention to something. Take a look at the amount of the voucher. The amount of vouchers has been going up. And that's important because you need to understand that the idea that you could get a phone call for a property, let's say, that is renting for $3,000, someone says they have a voucher, that is entirely possible. So as the voucher amounts, the award amounts have gone up, it has increased the pool of people that are eligible. And therefore, it's also increased the inventory that it would be eligible for these programs. Now, here's the problem, right? The problem is that how much inventory do we have? We don't have a lot of inventory. So you'll see that there are more recipients available for less apartments. And that poses a challenge to you because you will be receiving phone calls. Hey, I have a voucher. And again, you are required by law to consider that voucher just like any other source of income when you qualify someone for that property. Also importantly, your owner is required to do that. So we'll talk about a little bit about strategies a little bit later on. This is the HPD payment standards and the utility allowances. As I said, each agency has a little bit different of a payment standard. Here is the New York State Homes and Community Renewal, its payment standards. And my understanding is they're starting to become very similar in terms of how they're computed and so on. HUD-VASH, which I mentioned before, that is, again, similar to Section H, but it focuses on veterans. So it is administered by the Department of Veteran Affairs. Couple of, we get a lot of questions about this. So what I would call the burning broker questions. Number one, does Section 8 pay your broker fee? And the answer is no. The recipient pays the broker fee. And so importantly, you need to make sure you have a fee agreement. I got this phone call. I've gotten this phone call a couple of times. There is an assumption that either it's assumed that the program is going to pay the broker fee. And so the agent doesn't enter into a fee agreement with the recipient. And then it comes time, they get the apartment and they say, where's my fee? And guess what? There was no agreement. The agency doesn't pay it. The tenant didn't agree to pay it. So very importantly, you need to make sure that as we go through all of these programs, you understand, does the program cover the broker fee or not? With respect to security deposits, it varies, but in this case, they do not pay a security deposit. All of these programs require inspections. And again, it will vary whether utilities are covered or not. So again, all of these things are questions that should go on our checklist as we build those checklists. There is a new program, relatively new. It came about in 2021 called the Emergency Housing Voucher Program. These programs vouchers are allocated. So in this case, NYCHA and HPD received about 7,800 vouchers. The truth of the matter is those vouchers were not enough and they've run out of vouchers. So there is now a waiting list. The vouchers are distributed to recipients who are either homeless or risk of homelessness, experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, and so on. Now, what happens is the recipient does not apply specifically for the EHV, but rather they'll go to an agency and they'll apply through that. Again, the concept is the family gets to pick the housing of their choice. The housing has to meet certain acceptable health and safety standards. And again, the recipient is vetted so that there is an expectation they qualify for, let's say, the 60% of the rent that is covered. And then they also are vetted to understand and to make sure that they can cover their portion as well. In this case, there is a real estate broker fee of up to 15% of the annual rent. So the emergency housing voucher program does cover that. Here is just an example of an EHV. Now, I mentioned before, if you looked in New York 7, NYCHA is the agency that's overseeing this. But if you look up here in the voucher number, you'll see it begins with the letters EHV, and that indicates that it is an emergency housing voucher. HASA is a program that is set up for people with AIDS and who are HIV positive. And again, the person will need to qualify. They make an application and so on. This is a city program. Again, the housing standards and so on, they are similar to the way that the housing standards are created with some of the other programs. This is an example of a HASA letter of approval. So again, you should be aware that is, you would receive that. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit as we go on. Here is the HASA rent payment guidelines. Again, you can see this one is based on family size and not specifically the number of rooms. HASA, importantly, and you need to know this, will offer, does pay a broker fee, but it varies depending on where the person is coming from. It also covers, it doesn't provide a cash security deposit, but it provides a voucher for that. And again, the property does need to be inspected. There's something called city FEPS. This is overseen by the City Department of Social Services and the Human Resources Administration, again, based on household size. This is an example of, again, the approval letter, the amount that someone is going to receive, and so on. Here, broker fee is covered, 15% of annual rent, and there is a security voucher, not a cash deposit. Interestingly, they're also offering a $4,300 bonus to the landlord and a hold fee to the landlord. So this program is interesting because it recognizes that that there is definitely a lag. There is a time frame within which someone, a prospective tenant, is interested in a property, but based on the approval, the inspection, and so on, it could take a couple of weeks. It could take a month before the property is approved, which brings us to a question that I'm often asked, which is, suppose that we have a landlord and the landlord is receiving an application for someone who receives Section 8, for example, and doesn't. So one is a recipient, a voucher recipient, one is not. Does a landlord have an obligation to go with the voucher recipient specifically because they are a voucher recipient? And the answer is no. If a landlord has the ability, that non-recipient has the ability to sign a lease in 2 days, then as long as the landlord is considering the other party, their qualifications, and does not discriminate against the voucher recipient because they're receiving a voucher, the landlord has the right to go with the non-voucher recipient. So why do I bring that up? Well, because the truth of the matter is that it is an issue that we see and that needs to be addressed. And there are agencies out there and so on that that we see that are trying to build in they're trying to make sure that the recipient has that ability. So the idea of the agency paying the landlord to hold the property during this time makes a lot of sense, right? It kind of creates that balance, that equilibrium, which I think is really important to give the recipient the time frame within which to be able to move forward. And then finally, there's something called SOTA, Special One-Time Assistance. This is a program that is geared towards to people that really are, they could be down on their luck, that there is an expectation that they will be able to afford housing in the future. So this is kind of a pick-me-up. It's for 1 year, and it gives people the ability to, again, to have some assistance over the course of that year to get them to a place where they can start affording rent again. This does offer a broker fee, 15% of the annual rent, security voucher, inspections, and so on. Understand one thing, for SOTA, there is no voucher, okay? So first of all, before we go any further, I have a bunch of tips. Just wanted to, I will come back to the questions, but so let's cover a couple of things. So what are some important tips? I said it before, but I'm going to remind you again. If you're asked, do you accept Section 8 or any type of voucher, or the answer is we will consider all lawful source of income when qualifying a tenant or a purchaser. Now, let's go back to what we talked about earlier, the idea of having a system. The idea is that system gives you the ability to treat everyone the same way. So if someone calls you and says, do you accept Section 8? Yes, we will consider all lawful source of income when qualifying a prospective tenant or purchaser, and then you're going to follow your system. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to send out your rental application. You're going to send your financial questionnaire. You're going to follow the process for everyone, what you do when you're considering a prospective tenant, for example. Okay, now make sure that your financial questionnaire is legal. It should not say, what is your salary? It should say, what are your sources of income? It should give the recipient the ability to fill in all of those sources of income. Okay, now, importantly, very importantly, you may be tested at some point. The way that HRI works is, and that's how they test. They simply call up and say, hey, I have a voucher. Can you work with me, or something like that? And the appropriate response is, again, we will consider all lawful source of income. Let me send you my rental application, my financial questionnaire. What does that do? It gives you the ability, again, you're treating everyone exactly the same way, right? So I believe that if you follow this system, you do exactly what I just told you, you will pass a prospective tester every 100% of the time, because you're saying the same thing to everyone. You're giving everyone the same ability to make an application. You want to stop the conversation. I've listened to the recordings of people who have been tested, and what happens is the tester starts to ask more and more questions. And they'll say something like, well, what about a co-op? Or what about this? And so on. And so my point is, again, you want to do the same thing every time. Hey, here's our questionnaire. Here's our rental application. Please fill it out, send it back to me, and then we can move forward from there. That's the way to handle it. Now, let's suppose that someone has a voucher, which they very well may be. What happens then? Okay, here is the next step. The next step is, number one, someone says, hey, I have a voucher. You should request a copy of the voucher. I just showed you the types of vouchers that are out there. You should request the name of the caseworker. So most of these programs, the recipient has a caseworker that they're working with. And so you want to ask for the caseworker's name. Why? Well, they're going to be a good source of information for you. Additionally, you want to research the program. And folks, you can find all of this information out there. And so I've given you a snapshot of kind of the core issues and so on, but all this information is out there. So I need to see a copy of your voucher because I need to see how much you are being allocated. I want to talk to your caseworker because I want to make sure how much are you expected to put in. Finally, I want to do some research to make sure that I understand the program, because there is a legal expectation that I'm going to know how to work with this program. Again, you do not need to be an expert, but you are expected to understand the basic concepts of each of these programs. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay.
We have a couple actually. If you guys are sending questions, and make sure you're sending, not directly messaging them to LIBOR meetings, or you can put it just in the general chat. But here, let's see what we got. We had one question.
I'll take a quick look.
I think they sent them right to me because that was the default on Zoom. But here we have can we ask the interested tenant to provide the voucher before showing them the place?
So I would not. So what I would do is, again, I would stick to my program very, very carefully. Before I showed anyone a property, what I would do is I would say, let me send you my rental application and my financial questionnaire. That way you are going to be able to elicit the information you need from them. And you're also going to be able to vet them. And by the way, you're doing this for everyone. I'm not saying you just do this on voucher recipients. You are doing this for everyone. And that way it gives you the ability, again, to make sure that you're treating everyone the same way. But it also gives the ability to know that you are going to be able to vet someone and understand what their what their common or their needs are. So
was that? We have one more question too. I'm not sure if you answered this one because it was asked a little while ago. Someone asked, can we ask for credit scores from a Section 8 voucher if the landlord asks for it?
Okay, so credit score and multiple, meaning 40 times rent. Here's the thing. If you're asking for, first of all, you need to understand what the program pays. If you have a program that is paying 100% of the rent, then you'd never ask for a credit score, or you'd never say, hey, can you afford 40 times the rent? Why? Well, it's the government that's paying the rent. So you're not going to ask the agency what your credit score is. And it's irrelevant how much the person makes in terms of income, because again, we're looking at the financial criteria of the party of the agency. So this person has already been approved. Now, there are a number of programs which we demonstrated where the recipient is expected to pay a portion, but please understand that even in that case, the agency has vetted that person and their wherewithal to make the payment. So they've already been analyzed and said, yes, we will pay, because they qualify, we'll pay 70% of this amount, and we're expecting the recipient to pay this amount based on their income, whatever that looks like. So even in that case, to run a credit report, you can run a credit report. However, you can't reject the person based on their credit score because it's really irrelevant. Now, let's say they have 5 bankruptcies, they have 100 write-offs and things like that, then I think that you can make a business decision to say, we're not rejecting them based on their credit score, we're rejecting them based on their past credit history and again, their clear demonstration that they are not going to, the likelihood that they're not going to make a payment. Same thing goes with the 40 times rent, same concept. You cannot use those as proxies for rejecting someone. So frequently we're asked the question, someone says, well, I understood that real estate brokers are forbidden from asking a tenant what their income is. No, you're confusing that. What we're saying is you shouldn't be asking someone what your salary is, right? But remember, your job as agents is to vet people, to make sure that they can qualify. So there's nothing wrong with doing that, as long as what we're doing is making sure that we're asking for all of those lawful sources of income. Okay, more tips. So we mentioned this before, but I just want to highlight this again. There is no such thing as program housing. every person is entitled to use all of their sources of income when applying for housing. We just talked about this, the idea that we're not going to focus on credit scores and multiples, want to be really careful there. What happens if a landlord refuses to accept the voucher? What happens in that case? What do you do? Well, I will tell you that no commission is worth it if you're going to violate fair housing laws. So if you're going to have a landlord that does not want to accept fair housing, does not want to accept vouchers, the housing choice program and so on, don't work with them. It's very simple. Do not work with them. That's the bottom line. However, I just want to point out that there are exceptions to fair housing laws. Okay, so I just want to mention to you real quickly that there are exceptions to fair housing laws, but our important tip there is that even if an individual does not have to follow fair housing laws, you as a real estate agent can't work with them because you always have to follow fair housing laws. So if an owner, let's say of a two-family, says, I don't want to accept Section 8 for the rental upstairs, they may have the right to do that based on the number of units they have. However, I want you to understand that you cannot work with that agent. Why? Because the law says that the individual person can't advertise it. So they couldn't, for example, put out an advertisement, no Section 8, and they can't make it public. They can't say it. Well, if they said to you, the real estate agent, I don't want to take Section 8, what did they just do? They made it public. Okay, so your takeaway, your important tip, this class is about important tips, is you can never work with someone if they don't want to follow fair housing laws. Okay, so what happens when someone, particularly, you're approached? How do you deal, what not to do when we have a client with a voucher? So obviously, we're not going to say no housing vouchers or programs are acceptable, or this landlord will not accept it, or it generally doesn't work, or so on and so forth, right? You are not going to do that. You are going to say simply, we will consider all lawful sources of income when qualifying someone. We're not going to ignore emails, phone calls, text messages, and so on. I quite frankly, look, there's no law that says you have to return every phone call, every email, and so on. But based on the business that you're in, why wouldn't you? You never know when you have the $1 million listing sitting on the other side of that phone. Importantly, again, another important tip, and I keep saying these, the important tips, right? You can never ghost someone. Ghosting someone, and what do I mean by that? Not returning their phone call, not responding, is just as bad as saying to someone, I am not going to work with you because you have a voucher. So we are never going to do that. We are always going to be responsive. You can't say that a property is not available when it is available. And for obvious reasons, you are not going to specifically say, hey, do you have a voucher, for example? I go back to use the system. Make sure that you follow the system. You ask everyone the same questions. You send the same questionnaire and so on. Okay, so how to speak to someone, particularly when you're talking to a landlord, housing provider, and so on. Number one, remind them that source of income is a protected class under state law, city law. So, and if they don't follow it, there's a good chance they're going to be fined or they're going to find themselves in a lawsuit. If you Google fair housing settlements, you will see that the numbers are enormous. $10,000, $50,000, $250,000. I always say that you being on the wrong end of a fair housing violation, it's personal, professional, and financial ruin. There is no question about it. Now, tell the housing provider needs to understand, unfortunately, we talk about the negatives of this program, but the truth of the matter is that these programs are lifesavers. In so many instances, they are saving people. They are giving people the ability to get into shelter. So there is these common misconceptions. Oh, they don't work. They're too difficult, and so on and so forth. Folks, they are so important. And tell your landlord, your housing providers, look, you are going to get paid. You get paid directly. The money doesn't go to the recipient, it goes to the landlord. They're going to receive the money every month. So these are really good programs. And then there are programs, again, various programs, they offer incentives to the landlords. Now, I said before, everyone should be treated the same way. You do the same system and over again. Now I'm going to be a little bit contradictory. The truth of the matter is that when someone, we go through our program, we say, okay, here's our application process. Here's what we do. And they send back and say, okay, here's my voucher, right? We need to change our process a little bit. We are going to treat voucher recipients collectively a little bit different. So you're going to treat all of the voucher recipients the same, but they are treated a little bit differently as it relates to, because they are recipients, meaning, and going back to the idea of how do we look at their, we don't look at their credit. We don't look at the multiples and so on. We are going to treat voucher recipients a little bit more holistically. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there because I think that there are a couple of questions and I want to make sure that I do get to answer your questions. So, okay. So one of the questions is, what if the landlords reject the voucher? Well, so I have a situation now. I got a phone call from a broker yesterday. He's renting a $5,500 a month rental. Someone's calling and saying, well, I want to rent it, but I have a voucher. So he's saying, what do I do? Well, ask for the voucher. The voucher is for $1,000. Can he, as the broker for the landlord, say, I'm sorry, you don't qualify? The answer is yes, right? Your obligation under source of income laws is to just consider those source of income, but you still need to qualify them. You're not going to, again, where we started, you're not going to put someone into a property. The landlord doesn't have to reduce their rental amount. They just need to consider those sources of income. So with respect to a financial questionnaire, you should ask your companies. I'm assuming that each company does have a financial questionnaire. I don't know if LIBOR or OneKey does, but if you go to something called the Toolbox for Real Estate Agent Success, I know some of you are members, and I'm going to type my information in now. If you go there, we have a checklist builder, we have forms and templates, and you should be able to find a lot of what we talked about today. So I'm going to finish up there. I'm going to just type in my information. And if anyone has a question that they still want to ask, please feel free to ask, take yourself off mute and ask me that while I am typing. Okay. So I want to thank everyone for joining us.
Neil,
I hope you enjoyed. I hope that was successful. Just
question.
yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Neil. I have a question. Talk
Yeah.
to me about co-ops. If a co-op has a board package that has to be filled out by a potential renter, and that's a requirement of the board, what happens in that case?
Well, they still need to fill out the financial questionnaire of the board, but the board is no different. The board must consider that source of income. So if they don't qualify, right? If they don't qualify, that's one thing. If the board has standards that they don't meet, that's acceptable. But they have to consider that source of income, and they can't reject someone simply because they are a voucher recipient.
So if there's an online portal and things like tax documents, and that has to be uploaded, and those are things that the voucher recipient doesn't have?
So I'm not sure why the voucher recipient wouldn't have a tax return.
Okay.
Right. So the idea is to treat everyone the same way, but I'm sure the voucher recipient should have a tax return. If they haven't paid their taxes and there's a legitimate reason for that, then that would be one thing. If they haven't paid their taxes, well, that probably is a reason why they may get rejected.
Okay.
But you can't, again, the idea is to again to just consider this whole bucket of things, right? That's what the law is saying, and people shouldn't be discriminated because they have those vouchers.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the time today. I hope that was helpful, and you have my information. Feel free to reach out, and I look forward to seeing everyone soon. I teach, by the way, I teach at LIBOR. I teach the legal update class. I think it's next week, and the fair housing class. Feel free to join me. I'd love to see you again. Take care, everyone.